What's up, Plastic Addicts? Welcome back to the Sci-Fi Model Podcast Uncut, presented by Jason's Model Shop, the fastest growing sci-fi model making podcast on the internet. I'm your host, Jason C. Marshall. If this is your first time here, the Sci-Fi Model Podcast is your source for everything sci-fi model making, including pop culture subjects, movies and TV, entertainment, and a little bit of miniature wargaming. So today's episode, we're going to get into miniature wargaming, actually, and how that fits in relative to the sci-fi model making world. One of the things about this podcast is I want to do a couple things. I want to reduce gatekeeping as much as possible. That's why I cover subjects beyond just, like starships and stormtrooper figures or whatnot. So we've expanded it. It occurred to me a number of years ago when I was helping my friend launch the Anvil of War Gaming YouTube channel. Maybe wargaming does fit in with sci-fi model making. And that's really what we're going to get into today. My good friend Ken Bowman is a guest on the show. And because he's a friend, this is a bit more conversational. I'm not just throwing questions at him and being waiting for answers. So we meander a little bit. This is part 1 of 2 because it was such a long conversation. Yeah, it was a good conversation. I don't think we specifically answered the question, but we talk about all the things kind of around the similarities between the two hobbies and where they cross over and where they fit. Give it a watch, and I hope you enjoy today's episode.
Hi, I'm Ken Bowman. I'm a 3D printing enthusiast. I play a heck of a lot of war games. I absolutely love wargaming. Something I've been doing since I was a kid, be it, I started with D&D. And I was always into those miniatures and stuff like that, like the ones that from Ral Partha, like the steel ones. And then I've always been into models from various different eras. So like World War II planes, especially. A little bit of sci-fi. I'm a massive sci-fi nerd. Not so much a Trekkie.
No,
but I am definitely a huge fan
perfect.
a huge fan of the Ridley Scott Alien universe, and the Predator. And that kind of situation. Star Wars, I'm okay with. I like Star Wars, and I'm okay with Star Trek. I couldn't get into it as much as some people I know, but I do like the ship designs. I actually find them to be very nicely streamlined. I took up miniatures probably 2017. I got into Warhammer. I've always been kind of interested in it, but I never really got into it until then. And then it was a deep, dark hole that I just dove right into. And then when I decided to retire from film, I'm like, okay, well, I need something to do to kind of keep myself creative and to do projects and stuff like that. So I got into 3D printing. Partially because of my miniature wargaming. Okay, 100% because of my miniature wargaming, but because you can augment certain kits and stuff like that with them. So yeah. Long story short, I'm Ken Bowman. We're here to talk about miniature wargaming and 3D printing and how it relates to sci-fi model making.
Exactly. Tell me about Anvil of War, because I'm trying to get a sense of the timeline, because you would have had to get into Warhammer before that. And I can't remember the exact years the thing happened.
Okay, so Anvil of War is kind of funny because I had a membership at this work collective. And because I'm always kind of a person that has to be doing something, I always want to be productive. I decided to get a membership there. And so after work, I would go and work on whatever. And at the time, I was working on my video production business and just kind of revamping it because I took a bit of a hiatus for a few years. So I decided to rent an office space and was kind of utilizing that. So I had another hobby previous to that, which was paintball. It was a rather expensive one.
Yeah. But they're all expensive.
Well, okay, so I was playing competitively. I was really hard into it. And I decided, okay, well, I can't really afford to play paintball anymore because I was at a point where I had to go up another level in competition, and it was really getting expensive. And being a single dad with 2 kids, you gotta prioritize. Yeah. So my son and I have always kind of been interested in Warhammer. especially the lore. He was more into the lore, and I was more into like the minis and how cool they looked, and you know, the tabletop stuff, because I was always loved. You know, if it was like models or model railroading, especially model railroading, because I did have a layout when I was a kid. You know, stuff like that. I've always loved little tiny things. I even had, oh man, I had so many of those 1/72 scale little miniature soldiers. I always bought them from the hobby shop.
Yeah,
I love those things. I always set up. Battles. Most of them were World War II era, but I think I had some Roman stuff. So Anvil of War. I had decided to get out of paintball. I got into Warhammer. On a whim, I bought not the Indomitus box set, but the Dark. Anyways, it was the 8th edition entry level box set. So I bought that, painted it up, and somebody from the place where I was living taught me how to play it. And I really liked the game, so I played it a lot. And at the same time, I was renting this office. I was working my own space flight tabletop game in this office space, and then I decided that, okay, well, this is getting a little expensive because I wasn't making as much money in the video thing at the time. I decided to start making game nights. So I had a month every single night in which I rented the entire top floor, and I would host game nights. So I would, because I was a cook at the time, I would, you know, access all this food and stuff like that I could get from work, right? And I would get snacks and foods and stuff like that. I would prep it all myself, and then, you know, I'd have like dice and all these things, right? And I had a huge board game collection at the time, which I'm starting to recollect. But I had a massive board game collection, so I would bring that, and then I would set up the place. People would come, and they would rent a table and, you know, bring their own games or play what I had.
Right.
It was really nice, kind of like a cafe scenario. And it being a small town, there was really nothing like that going on. So Adam, my old business partner, he was at one of my game nights because he's from Carlton Place. So he heard about this and he came down, and just on a whim, we just started talking because we were both really into Warhammer. And then Adam spits out, hey, you know what? He's like, you do video. The conversation literally just summed up in a very short sentence. Ken, you do video, I do Warhammer. Let's make a YouTube channel. And for 4 years, we ran Anvil of War. You were involved in the very beginnings of that.
Yeah, just helping to get kind of set up with the things I knew. But this was before I realized that everything about growing on YouTube, you're told, is a lie.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's do this and do that and do this and do that. Like, look at, all you can do is show up and hope you get lucky.
Well, okay, you got to understand though, YouTube's been around since 2005. I've been on YouTube since about 2 or 3 years after I graduated college for television broadcasting. That's how long I've had a channel on YouTube, and I really haven't done a whole lot with it other than, you know, posting client videos or whatever, the blues and the Rito and stuff like that. But YouTube is really, really old, right? And they've been kind of taking something that's like almost 20 years old and then making it work for a modern social media platform, right? When it originally wasn't even designed for that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So the algorithms are flawed and you know, stuff like that. So I see YouTube as a tool in an arsenal of tools. It's like the tool belt I wear at work, right? It's just one piece.
Oh yeah,
of a whole network of tools that you can use to kind of promote yourself for whatever you want. So anyways, Anvil of War, to keep it short, was a Warhammer 40K based YouTube channel. We covered tactics. We covered a little bit of. We had a few battle reports. Those were massive projects, and considering like I was pretty much doing all the tech at that point in time, they were huge.
That is a huge workload.
It was a massive workload, you know. And near the end, we just kind of make really simplified things, and we just did a lot of tactics videos and how to make kit bashes and stuff like that. Because really, ultimately, there's two parts to Warhammer. and I'm just going to specifically talk about Warhammer right now.
Mm-hmm.
The beauty of the channel was we had so much content for one specific thing, and I would have loved to have expanded into other games because a lot of other games are very similar. They have both aspects, because miniature wargaming, you've got the modeling aspect, you've got the painting aspect, you've got kit bashing, you've got tools like 3D printing that you can use, you've got the lore, which is all the story that comes with these characters, because a lot of them have very interesting back lore, and if any of your listeners are into 40k at all, they will understand completely what I'm talking about. Like, my favorite faction is the Necrons. They have this tragic backstory, right? But they have the most interesting characters because they're all literally insane robots that are older than anything in the universe, right? So that just kind of gives you an example of how off the charts some of the lore can be. It's a very dark universe, but it's still classified as sci-fi, but it's gothic sci-fi.
Yeah, well, that was the thing because I never really cared for tabletop gaming or wargaming or whatnot, but then when I was kind of seeing the stuff that you guys had, like their little suits and their giant robots and mechs and whatnot, I'm like, oh shit, it's like I said, it is literally sci-fi model making.
It is, absolutely.
But the end use is different because they become something that's active versus, a model when it's done, just a passive thing on your shelf.
Yes, yeah. So like, I've got it blurred out, but that shelf behind me is full of Warhammer figures.
Yes.
So they're not right now, because I'm not playing. 10th edition came out, and I'm just kind of waiting to see what happens with 10th edition. Like, because if anybody that's listening is into 40k, they just released 10th edition. 9th edition, in my opinion, my humble opinion, I was really turned off by it because of what they did and how they made the game progress. And so kind of 10th edition, I'm just kind of waiting to see what happens. So my models are just collecting dust and being a nice thing to look at on my shelf.
Well, it still makes it for a good, interesting display.
Oh, absolutely. Everybody comes to my apartment, it's like, oh my Lord, what is that? That's so awesome.
Yeah.
Right. And it's still model making, because these come in kits. They come on sprues. They're plastic model kits. The thing I love about what Games Workshop does, is the manufacturer of Warhammer 40k, is they are so super detailed. They're probably, and I've played a lot of miniature war games. Their kits are probably, if not the most detailed, damn close that I've ever seen.
Because it actually brings to mind a question I hadn't thought of before, because you've had the crossover from regular models to wargaming models, and I feel like the general fit is better. Like, seams are hidden better, and things actually the parts go together the way they're supposed to, versus look a lot, maybe not so much currently, but past model kits don't fucking fit right.
So for the most part, right, some of the older Games Workshop kits are not spectacular. Right now, like when they release a box set, like they just released the Leviathan box set, which I didn't buy into, but they're push fit, right? So they have the pins in them, and then you push fit them together. You can glue them together, or you don't have to glue them together. They're like super fine, because the molds that they're using in the Games Workshop factory, they're plastic injection molds.
Yeah.
They're highly detailed, and I mean, they're all CAD design now, right? So
which helps.
Yeah, the older models are way less detailed versus the newer models are way more intricate, way more detailed, and they fit a lot better. Sometimes you will need some of the modeling putty to fill gaps. Like, I always keep some lying around, but I barely ever have to use it. And then I use a little a scraper to kind of get mold lines off and stuff like that. Like, it's the same types of modeling tools that you would use.
I would say that for anyone listening who's not familiar, the best comparison would be the wargaming models are probably more in the quality range of a Bandai versus, say, an AMT or an MPC, or like even current ones.
Gundam models are amazing. I haven't gotten into Gundam because I'm not really into the whole I'm a big mech fan. I'm a huge mech fan. When we get it deeper into this conversation, you guys will just discover how deep this rabbit hole goes.
Oh yeah, I actually have next week lined up a Gundam builder.
Oh, I so want to at least do like one or two kits, but I haven't found a kit that has really truly spoken to me and been like, that just looks awesome. I need to do it. Now, if I found a Robotech one, there's a few Robotech mechs that are amazing, but they're stupid expensive right now because they're highly collectible, right? And I could technically just 3D print it, which is fun and isn't fun because it's not a model kit that you put together. You're just printing a 3D object.
I had no idea how big Gundams were until fairly recently. So there's like four good hobby shops in the city, and three of them have massive Gundam sections.
There are toy shops that carry these, and they're like $100 model kits. But it's Gundam has been around for very, very long. Like it's been I can remember Gundam from when we were young. And if they're still producing the anime, which it's based on, then that's like almost 30 plus years of animation to go on storyline and stuff like that. Like look at what is it? There are some anime series that have been running for that long, and it's totally feasible because it's a huge art form in that country. I never really got into it, but my sister's into it, and so I've learned a lot about it from her. So speaking of mecha, one love I've had for a very long time, and this is the whole reason why I got into 3D printing, is I'll bring a couple of these up. So this is a prime example of how different, like a model kit you're gonna put together and build a lot of the catalyst or Ironwood metals, which are based on the old Ralpartha metal miniatures. You don't really put them together. You more or less just kind of put them on a base and you paint them. So this is a catalyst mech. This is a Highlander, right? So he is white and very washed out, right? And I've got another little guy right here, right? So like you can see these models are meant to be handled, and like so I'll do a really good paint job on these, right? Yeah, or at least try my best.
Yeah, like I said, the webcam doesn't do it justice, and I may get you to do separate photos that I can post.
Oh no, I can totally do that.
But yeah, the painting on those is incredible.
And I don't know if you shellac your stuff, but like shellac.
Clear coat.
I thoroughly clear coat everything I do, right? Because I'm touching it, I'm handling it. Right, this guy has a magnet on it, so I can take it off. I can turn the turrets, stuff like that. Like
you would do heavier than I do, but
you're handling them, and you can get some really good clear coats that you don't even notice. Sometimes when you're doing decals and stuff like that, you'll use a really thin clear coat layer to put the decals on, especially with Battletech, because they're super, super small. I mean, like with Warhammer 40K, you've got some areas for decals. Like this guy has a few areas in which I've used decals and stuff like that, and it's just like the same sorts of techniques that you would use in any modeling.
Well, yeah, and that was what kind of got me thinking about this when I kind of came over and you showed me your 3D printing setup. Then you were showing me your figures and whatnot. I'm like, well, this is the same thing.
Yeah, it is.
This is the same thing. So why we need less division and more.
It's a difference in purpose. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, right? Like, so you build Star Trek models, and like you do commission Star Trek models for people, and then you build them for yourself for your own enjoyment. I build. So lately I've been collecting Battletech miniatures because you don't really build them; you more or less just paint them, as I said.
Right. And that's because of the small scale.
Yeah, it's because of the 6mm scale. I think it's a little smaller than 6mm. But it's technically 6mm. It's that close on the scale of models. It's 1/285th. So it's Z scale modeling,
right?
In other terms.
Yeah.
I have a chart. I seriously have a chart in which I'm like, okay,
shows
so
you what
like if I find a model I want to print or whatever, You know what I mean? And I'll actually try and scale it down to the right scaling and stuff like that. So I have to figure out what the scaling is, and then I bring it down in the 3D software.
Yeah.
We can touch on that later. That's a whole other ball game.
3D printing, wow, was a
it's a deep dark hole. I told you, man. It's a hobby in itself.
Yeah, I'm gonna have Ken on again. There's a lot of topics to cover.
But like, I mean, ultimately, we use the same paints. I use Vallejo.
Yep.
Some people might be familiar with Citadel, right? Citadel, they have a lot of good paints in Citadel, and then there's Army War Painter. They have some really good lines as well. I find Army War Painter.
I've been using the AKs.
Oh, AKs are really good. I have some
Mr. Hobby.
There's a few. See, the beautiful thing is, miniature wargaming has the advantage of creative freedom, right? Yep. I find what turned me off of like straight model making, because like honestly, if I was a model maker, I would be doing World War II planes 100%.
There's a lot of interesting subjects in there, and the things you can do to customize them, make them your own.
Right, but I don't really want to do realistic models. I want to do creative models, right? So like I thoroughly enjoy painting, right? I enjoy kind of like and how they look on the table. You know, I want them to look awesome on the table. Like I'm working on a massive BattleTech Alpha Strike table right now. It's 6x4, which is a standard size. But like it's
that's gonna be good.
You know, right now I'm working on terrain, right? So I've been 3D printing like this right here is a 3D printed what is it? It's an aerospace landing pad, right? So it's an airstrip. So I bought a terrain kit that allows me to print that, and then next week I'm going to be buying some urban terrain and stuff like that. So I've just kind of been building up the STL files I have.
Yeah,
but it's all to work on this model and have the most diverse table that I possibly can, so that when people come over and we want to have a beer and play some BattleTech, we can play some BattleTech on
just set up
and we can do whatever scenario we want. You know.
So I want to shift gears just a little bit and kind of just. I want to come back to Anvil of War, but away from it at the same time. And what I mean is that you had mentioned that you had gotten out of BattleTech. I believe it was two reasons: the constantly changing rules and the cost.
Warhammer,
pardon me, and switch. No, but you'd always been into BattleTech, though.
Yeah, so like I played BattleTech
over to it.
I played BattleTech in '96. It was actually the first. So like I played a lot of D&D with my brother, and like a lot of D&D. So that's kind of how I was introduced to miniatures in the first place, and map making and all this stuff. So we always had board games in the house. We always had like stuff like that, like D&D. And then I was given, probably when I was like 17 years old, I was given a whole bunch of Ral Partha. I wish I still had them, to be honest with you, because they were worth so much money. Right. I was given a bunch of Warhammer, like the old fantasy stuff. Right. So I've always had this interest in them. I've always had this interest. It's just been, and like I've always been building models. I used to buy kits all the time from the hobby shop when I was a kid, but I couldn't afford to paint them, so I just got bored with them and I ended up breaking them.
Just a quick aside. So we both grew up in a small town. There was one hobby shop, literally called the Hobby Shop.
Yeah. And that was the awesomest store in town.
It was this little tiny, like a little rectangular space that was more deep than wide.
Yep.
And so in
the back was all wooden crafts, and in the front was like model kits.
It's model train stuff, magazines, just kind of paints and stuff.
I used to buy my model railroader magazines every month from there.
So there was a lot of like, it was just kind of like an everything store, this little tiny mom and pop place. So I would routinely walk past the stuff that you were into to get to the model kits, which were kind of centered down the length of it off to the right hand side.
Yeah.
And and that's what I've talked about before, is the being a model maker in the 80s and 90s. We didn't have the benefit of all the stuff today because we had one hobby shop. There was nowhere else to go to get anything. Like there was no, the books and articles and whatnot may have existed, but we didn't really have access to them. You get a magazine once a month, maybe.
Yep.
So, we were left to kind of here's the stuff, but you're left to your own devices, just kind of figure it out on your own.
Yeah. Yeah, when I'm an old retired man, I'm probably going to have an HO scale layout in my house.
I would love a model railroad, just the time and money and space.
Oh, it's insane. You know what, to be honest with you, if you ever have the chance to have a model maker on your show that does HO scale, or any trade modeling, they are some of the most creative and cost-effective model makers you will ever meet in your life, because they're building a massive model, right? The stuff is expensive, but I've learned things about how to make trees with metal wire and acrylic paste.
Now, here's the thing, though. I may actually do that because, and you'd be maybe be interested in a road trip with me for this. In one of the rail cars, one of the passenger cars, the Railway Museum, back home in Smiths Falls, they have built a layout of the station grounds, basically for an HO scale from the CP tracks, where they used to run under it, all the way to the lift bridge.
Oh, nice! That's pretty sweet.
So that I would like to. I'm sure they'd be interested to come on, and that might be a road trip show.
That'd be a good road trip show. I'd be totally down. I might have to unretire for that and be a sound guy.
Yeah, there you go. It's amazing. It's not finished, but it's operational.
Okay, so that means some of the tracks work.
I saw a post. They're doing some switching operations on the weekend.
God, do you know? Okay, so I was watching a 3D printing thing just on the side of this. It was a chain drive. So this guy modeled city streets.
Okay.
And he modeled the city streets. They were actually modeled, but he 3D printed a train drive to go underneath the city streets with a geared down motor system, right? So that cars could move on the streets just using neodymium maggots, and he could place them wherever he wanted to on this road, right? Because every second link had a magnet in it.
That's cool.
And they did the same track over and over again, but it created movement in a static environment.
Yeah, exactly.
Like a scale layout.
Yeah, because that's the thing. The model railroads are great, but your trains move, but your town area is static.
And so for model railroaders, yes, I get it. The trains are amazing, but for a guy like me, I love trains. Don't get me wrong, but a lot of what attracted me to model making, and the whole train setup was actually the atmosphere that they create around.
Yeah.
Right, the cities and towns, the infrastructure that they have to model around it. I remember just being super inspired by Model Railroader when I was a kid, just reading these magazines over and over and over again, and then taking a look, because the way they did it was they had the whole layout mapped out, and then they had pictures of the layout. And the funnest part was okay, well, where's this picture from? And then I'd articulate. I'd find it on the map. So that was my favorite part.
Sorry, no. There's a guy at Kingston. I follow him on Facebook. He's doing a model of the Kingston sub. So that's like Kingston to Napanee or something like that. I don't know the subdivisions, but he's doing the same thing. And there's spots that are close to where we grew up that he has modeled.
Oh wow, that's super cool.
Yeah.
So they're some of the most creative and cost-effective model makers, right? Because so when they buy a model train, chances are it's already painted, right? But they'll go through and they'll do all the weathering. And they have to learn weathering really, really, really well.
Yep.
Right. When you were a kid, you painted a model and it looked pristine. I remember cars or whatever, we used to work on, and it was always a new looking car.
Yeah.
I never learned how to weather until I started making miniatures. And even then, the way you weather a model is different than the way I weather a model, but they're very similar. I'll use a wash.
Yeah, you'll the same products.
You'll use an oil wash, right? And I like oil washes. I just don't have. I haven't set. I'm not set up to work with with oil-based products right now, and I don't want to have I live in an apartment. I don't want to have turpentine all over the place to try and thin stuff out, but. So acrylics work for me, and washes and inks and stuff like that are better for me. But, there's some interesting techniques to provide a lot more realism. That stuff interests me, but in the same token, it's a little bit boring because okay, if I want to do a Pig 51 Mustang, right? I want to do it accurately, or as accurately as possible. And that's one of the key differences between painting a model and painting a miniature, right? Because like with this Tau battle suit here, I have the freedom to create the colors, right? You know, the terrain looks somewhat realistic, right? It's modeled fairly accurately, but like this here is completely from my brain, right? Like, or pictures.
Yeah, you just you got a thing, and then you just went to
Yeah, I just kind of went. I had fun. Same with so this guy. This is a reference picture. This is a Clan Wolf Beta Galaxy mech, right? So I just looked at the pictures and I'm like, okay, these colors are close enough, and I came up with this paint scheme, and now I'm painting them all like this, right? There's a lot more freedom when you're working with miniatures, you know, but there also is like when I take my stuff to a store, like I paint well because I like to paint. I really love painting. It's nice. Like when I want to sit down and paint and I'm in a mood to sit down and paint, you know, I want to paint. You know, I want it to look good. I want it to be some of my best work. And I always try and challenge myself to do a little bit better on every single one, right? So, but not everybody's going to paint at my level, right? And there are some people who I know personally and I look up to that paint a million times better than me. Right?
Okay, so you actually opened the door to something, and we're gonna talk about the painting, because I want to talk about imposter syndrome, Mister. But I want to come back very briefly, just quickly to the your transition from Warhammer to Robotech. I know you specifically mentioned the cost, and this is an important thing to talk about because even regular model kits are stupid expensive right now, which means that, you know, it's becoming a barrier to people who would like to have a hobby. Like, you know, the kits that we would get, you know, I'd get an Enterprise for $25 in the 90s. It's like $80 to $100 now. That's just for the kit. And so, you know, price is becoming a barrier. And now my understanding is for you, it wasn't just price, it was also size.
So Warhammer is 28 millimeter. So I don't know what that transitions to, but basically like a human is about an inch tall.
Right.
So on a 6x4 foot map, right, your battle scale is pretty limited. Even though those battles take 3 or 4 hours to go through, you know, it's pretty limited. Some of the bigger models can be a little bit intrusive in your house. Like I have one $600 model that from Forge World that is like this big.
Yeah,
and it's hard to transport. Like it's made out of resin, and I don't move it because I don't want it to break. It took me 3 months to build and paint. I meticulously, and the thing is, as I was building it, I was painting the detail underneath it. You can't see some of the detail on this, but I painted it anyways.
Right.
Because I wanted to do it. I spent a lot of money on this. It's called a synaptic construct. So if you're listening or watching, just look it up. You'll see this thing. It looks like a giant robotic praying mantis. It's so sick with big freaking guns and gigantic claws. Just
right.
Anyways, so the price point of Warhammer and it keeps going up, right? Like so for $60, you get this guy here was $40.
Jesus.
Right, but he's a collector's item, right? But for 10 of these guys, it's $60, and for this one here, this is a $40 model, and then the kit is, I think it's $90 now. So this guy is a small knight. It's called an armiger. You know, this guy here, this tank, that's a $60 tank.
Which is hilarious because that actually can end up costing more than a tank model kit.
Yeah. This guy here is $30. You know, here. This guy right here. This is a Battletech miniature. This guy, if I was to buy a single Battletech miniature, is $10. If I buy it from Iron Will Metals, it's $20. Yeah. And I'm using 4 in a lance or 5 in a star, right? So you can see the price difference. So
and that's
when we moved from 8th edition to 9th edition, I decided I was really turned off because they kept changing the rules. So you buy a $60 book to learn the rules, which is this thick. And then you also have to buy a codex, which has all the rules for your specific army because it's that detailed. So each army has their own specific rules, right? So the game can be pretty imbalanced sometimes. So they're constantly changing it to balance it, but in doing that, they're constantly shifting the balance of the game. So one unit that you bought a few of, 3 months ago can be absolutely useless if you're really serious about the game. And then 6 months down the road, it can be the most amazing thing, and then it can be turned useless again because they updated the rules. Right. So it's a pain in the butt. I got into BattleTech, actually. I got into BattleTech, and BattleTech has been relatively the same for the last 30 years. I have 3rd edition all the way up to the most current edition for the rule books, and for the most part, they're generally the same. All they've been doing is just streamlining things a bit, and it's not updated every 3 years or so. It's updated every, what was the latest edition? The latest edition is for like 2 or 3 years ago, and that's because a new company bought it, right? That's why they updated it. They amalgamated all of the rules into one massive book chain, and they put the detail into it. And it's funny because there's a few different ways you can play BattleTech, right? There's only one play you can play Warhammer, and if you want to play Warhammer another way, you have to buy a completely different game system. So if you want to play space battles in BattleTech or Warhammer, you have to buy Battlefleet Gothic, which they don't produce anymore. If you want to play epic size battles, which is 6mm Warhammer, not 28mm Warhammer for larger battle sizes, you have to buy Titanicus. Right, and so on and so forth, because they don't produce Epic anymore. Epic, I think, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sure someone's going to yell at me for this. Is now Titanicus. So it's Games Workshop is an awesome company, but the bottom line is they're a manufacturing company, so they will produce content to make you buy new stuff to play their game, right? And they don't promote 3D printing. They don't promote, like, they're staunchly against it. They don't promote anything third party, right? Catalyst, and I fully understand why they do this. Catalyst is the big company that publishes BattleTech right now for Topps, because Topps owns the license. Right. Catalyst at some point in time, so like prior to the new releases, they really didn't put their nose up at 3D printed minis, right? Because right now you can get pretty much any of the MechWarrior Online mechs for relatively cheap or free, and 3D print them, and then bam, you've got mech units, right, that you can use on the tabletop. And they look just as good as the Catalyst miniatures. They look really good. They're almost as detailed. The Catalyst miniatures are an interesting mix of the classic ugly 1980s BattleTech versus the more modern style, right? Whereas the MechWarrior Online stuff is like, computer graphics at their peak circa, 7 years ago when the game came out. 7 years ago? Yeah, because it came out in 2016. So, no. Came out in 2018. Sorry, 5 years ago. Right. So, like, the quality is there, and you have options, right? Because if Catalyst hasn't released something yet, right, chances are Iron Wind Metals has the model, and if they don't have the model, you can generally find somebody that has it, because BattleTech is so in depth. It's like, I don't know if you know anything about World War II, but do you have any idea how many tanks the American military had? How many varieties of tanks? How many varieties of tanks the German military had? They had tanks for specific uses for just about every situation. Those engineers were on top of their stuff. BattleTech is very much the same way. They have tanks for every specific situation. It is a very human level war game, right? So, I mean, ultimately, mechs on the tabletop are like the ultimate champions, right?
Yeah.
So tank commanders are a little bit shit in their pants when they encounter a mech.
Yeah.
But at the same point in time, they're still a menace. Helicopters at the same time, they're called VTOLs in BattleTech. So, anyways, long story. I getting sidetracked.
Yeah, that's fine.
My transition happened because I got sick and tired of having to consistently update my rules and spend $200-$300 just to be able to update what a game I wanted to play. Right? Plus, it's you're transporting models.
Yes,
to play a game.
Be very careful with that.
It can be problematic unless you're willing to spend like $300-$400 on a very specific case. Sometimes up to $1,000 on a magnetic case to carry these miniatures around, and it's bulky, right? BattleTech, I can literally take a case that's like this and bring all of my mechs to my buddy's place and go play. So I have my BattleTech kit consists of a laptop bag and a carrying case for my miniatures. That's it. That's all it is. Whereas in Warhammer, it was several carrying cases, all filled with foam, plus my books, plus this, plus
that's
that.
A lot of. So, and I apologize, I've been saying it wrong. So it's BattleTech, not Robotech.
Yeah, Robotech is
but it's another.
It's just another mecha.
Okay. So
Robotech is just as good.
So basically, it comes down to, so let's say accessibility for modelers, and let's face it, builders and potentially gamers. And the way things are these days, cost can be a factor. So BattleTech is a bit more accessible, stable rules, lower costs overall, the ability to use 3D printed accessories without being...
Unless you're doing a tournament.
Right.
Yes. But I don't play competitively, so I don't care.
So so BattleTech, just from a cost, size, and accessibility perspective, is a bit more accessible.
Well, okay. Don't get me wrong there. You can 3D print Warhammer. But and you can replicate their models very well. In fact, there's a lot of people who make ST. There's a few YouTube channels right now that stick their neck out and they promote 3D printing armies. But some of the models, I don't think they would 3D print very well. Marines print very well because they're chunky, right? And resin is fragile. So unless you're willing to spend, a few $100s on a kilogram of high tensile, like high strip, like very like ABS, like high end friggin' resin that can take high heat and you can drop it on the floor and it's not going to break. You're going to buy like a $40 bottle of resin. You drop that thing on the floor, it's going to shatter because it's resin. Resin is fragile. It's not plastic. So you can 3D print just about any tabletop war game. What got me into the 3D printing aspect was BattleTech, and I wanted all these other units, and it was kind of expensive. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to 3D print my stuff. And then I found BattleTech was way less expensive than Warhammer anyways. So I still buy Catalyst stuff and I 3D print stuff. Mostly lately, what I've been doing is 3D printing a lot of terrain.
Yeah, and look, I'm not trying to compare one to the other as far as overall quality. It's more of a, hey, if you want to get into something new and cost the factor, maybe don't jump into Warhammer right away versus some other options.
See, here's the thing: there's so many options, right? You also have Star Wars Armada. Right. There's I don't know the particular name of it right now. There's a Star Trek tabletop miniatures game out there too. The Star Wars Armada, the minis are actually pre-painted.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So you don't have.
So you just buy your stuff and start playing.
You buy your stuff and start playing, right? So there's that, right? Like people enter tabletop gaming at all different levels. I personally love the painting and the modeling aspect. So my stuff looks pretty darn good on the tabletop. I know better painters than me. I know worse painters than me. some people are cool with showing up with flat gray models because they just want to collect them or they want to play or whatever, and they're totally cool with that. It doesn't bother me at all, right? So people enter at all different levels. Plus, it's what you're into and what you can find a market for. So, like, I have a few games that I'd love to get into, but this being Ottawa, and I don't know the market yet, right? Like, I have Warlord Games. They have a few titles. They have Black Seas, which is
you show me that, and I may have an interest in that.
It's tall ship battles. It's super fun. It's so like all your data is on the card, right? And it's dice rolling. And then you've got bolt action, right? And then you have black powder. So bolt action is World War II era. Black powder is musket era, right?
Yeah.
You know, and then you've got SPQR, you've got Hail Caesar, which are all Celtic Rome, right? Then you've got Clash of Spears, which is, I think, a lot cheaper to get into, and it's a lot older game too. It's actually ancient. It's ancient warfare, right? So there's all different genres of war games. Don't forget, people have been playing war games for thousands of years. Chess, all right, is a war game.
Yeah.
Right. So essentially, and I mean, what was it? The first war game book, like, that taught you how to make and play a war game, was actually called Tiny Soldiers, and it was in the late 1800s.
Okay.
Right. So, like, wargaming has been around for a long time. In the 1960s, it was literally simulation, like hex-based simulation stuff. What is it? Avalon Hill, though, they made huge amounts of these, you know, play the Battle of Midway, play this, play that, and it was all D6 rolls. They're super simmy, right? Super simulation, but, you know, is there. Plus, they had space battle stuff that you could do that tried to simulate what it would be like to actually have a battle in space. You know, so the miniatures market is a newer market that's exploded mainly because of plastics manufacturing. So it's easier for a manufacturer to produce plastics than it is for manufacturers to produce the metal cast stuff, like the die cast stuff.
Yeah.
Plastics are easier to work with, you know, stuff like that. It's taken miniatures a very long time to kind of get to the point where they walk away from the die casts or pewter models to get to pure plastic. And it's made it easier for miniatures to get manufactured. Like, when we were kids, the major manufacturers were Citadel, right? So they did Blood Bowl, Warhammer Fantasy, and Warhammer 40K.
Yeah.
And some of the models, they looked crap, right? And then you had Ralpartha, who did all of the D&D miniatures, all of the FASA miniatures, the Battletech stuff. They did Robotech, and they did a whole bunch of other stuff, right? So they were all made in pewter, right? And usually when you're making pewter, the process is you take a big rubber disc, you create a wax replica of whatever it is you're trying to mold, and then you manufacture in small amounts, right? Using spin forging. Versus nowadays, you can make, you know, I used to work in plastics manufacturing. So you take a CNC plate that they meet, and then they high pressure, high heat injection mold these things, and you can make thousands of them at a time. Like, you know what I mean? Model makers have been doing that for ages, right? So toy makers and stuff like that. Miniature makers haven't been, because miniatures are a little more high detail, right? Than some model kits. I should state some model kits, because the pewter models were capable of capturing that detail, versus the plastic manufacturing at the time wasn't capable of doing it. Plus, it could have depended upon whatever plastic material they were using, right? So, it's, I want to say it's a newer market. So, like, before the 1980s, it was usually lead soldiers, and then it moved to pewter, which was a safer metal. So, like, when we were kids, they were all pewter, which still contains lead, but it's a lot less toxic to work with. And then gradually throughout the 90s, they started making plastic kits, like various different companies. They started making plastic kits to varying different degrees. Some were great, some weren't so great. The top dog within the last 10 years has been Games Workshop, because they've been capable of producing high detailed models. And then you had 3D printing on the market, right? So like SLA printers so that's the resin. They have been on the market for a number of years. I mean, it's been around for a very long time, but like it's been more of a consumer acquirable technology in the last little while, right? And it's capable. Like you can print entire games, right? You can go to Cults 3D and buy entire armies for whatever game you want to play, right? And print and play them for pennies on the dollar, right? If you want to do a chess set out of resin, go for it.
Oh yeah, you can. Yeah.
So it's whatever you want it to be. I wouldn't say that BattleTech is better than Warhammer. I'd say the entry point is a lot cheaper.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Not so much a comparison what's better. It's like
Well, so
what is
BattleTech,
actually feasible depending on your situation.
Yeah, it depends on what you want to play too, right? Like, so if you want more of a streamlined game, Warhammer is good, but Warhammer can be rules heavy. BattleTech Alpha Strike is very much like a Warhammer style war game, whereas BattleTech Classic is very much like an Avalon Hill style simulation battle, right? One's going to take you 7 hours to do a battle. The other one's going to take you an hour and a half.
Right.
But you're not going into the same amount of detail. There's a few other ones. I've got a few others back here. There's Heavy Gear Blitz, which is based on an RPG. So it's another mecha game. And actually, it's funny because these guys are Canadian too. I should give these guys a shout out. DreamPod 9 makes this game. And it's blurry. Whatever. So Heavy Gear Blitz. So it's all mechs. It's a 28 millimeter. It's 15 millimeter. Sorry, it's 15 millimeter scale minis. They're not as detailed as I'd like them to be. They're not as detailed as Catalyst. They're not as detailed as Games Workshop, but they're still very nice, especially when they're painted up. Nobody plays it around here, but I do know there's a market for it. And it's all mecha based. It's all mechs, it's all tanks and stuff like that. And sometimes there's infantry units, but I haven't really delved that far into it. So there's a lot out there for somebody who's looking for something, and you've got, if you're into World War II tanks, Flames of War. Oh my God, there's so much to it. Plus they have just about every, the Flames of War series covers literally just about any theater of war you'd want in modern times.
Right.
And it's I don't actually know the scale. I think it's an N scale, or it's a bit bigger than N scale because the tanks aren't that big. Like, one thing you're going to notice about a lot of war games, though, is if you're in it for the modeling, you're not going to get as much detail out of a miniature wargaming model versus a model.
Yeah.
Right. Because one's meant for detail and to look really nice and to be eye-catching and to be accurate. The other one's meant for, I want to roll dice on the tabletop. This thing needs to behave quickly and look good.
Yeah.
Right. If you find a model tank that's the same scale as Flames of War, by all means, use it in Flames of War. Oh my God. Yeah. That would look so amazing. Yeah. And if you can model at that scale accurately, holy crap. It'll take you forever to build a tank battalion, but have at it, right? It's
that's
what you want it to be. If you find an audience, right? Like if it's a couple of guys getting together over a beer, and it's a casual audience too. Like my buddy Adam and the rest of the crew at Anvil of War, they always went to this festival, not a festival, but it's a convention called Adepticon, and they just get stinking drunk, played Warhammer, and check out all the new war games on the market. Right? It's a fantastic thing, and there's nothing stopping you from switching back between the hobbies. Right? Like
Oh yeah.
A World War II enthusiast would probably love bolt action and the detail that it provides, because then they can take their models and they can envision that that scenario that they already envisioned that tank in, like especially if they're doing dioramas and stuff like that.
Yeah.
In fact, I'd love to see that.
That's the. It feels like endless options, which is kind of nice.
Yeah.
So, I want to talk about painting and commissions and imposter syndrome. Let's not look at. I know this is a big one, but okay. Part of the reason, because I've realized that very quickly that I'm going to be talking about things that no one else is really talking about in the sphere, and a couple people. It's a small percentage, but a couple people have expressed, hey, thank you for talking about these things. Because look, social media, it's all curated. So everything is perfect all the time.
Right, and it's funny because there was this meme going around a while ago about this is my first mini I'd ever painted, right?
That's perfect.
And it looks perfect. It's like a perfectly painted, above tabletop quality miniature, and I'm like, bullshit. There's no way that's the first miniature you ever painted.
Yeah,
you either painted models for a living before that, or you were working on campus, because there's no way that somebody just picked up a paintbrush and painted even a 28 millimeter model. That's this big. Have you ever painted eyes on a model? Like an eyeball on a model that big? It's freaking hard.
I can't paint eyeballs on a 1/24 scale person.
Right. So it's not easy, and you have to practice at it. You can't if you're pulling that stuff off, being this is my first model that I ever painted, and it's above tabletop quality, by all means enter a competition.
Yeah.
And stop shaming the rest of the people, because it's that crap that turns people off of the mini gaming market, because they're like, oh, my stuff doesn't look that good. I see stuff and I'm like, wow, my stuff doesn't look that good. But I'm like, you know what? He did something or she did something that I'd like to try, so I'm going to try to do that and get better at it. I've been working.
Oh yeah, to be able to constantly improve and up your game and integrate new techniques,
information and knowledge. Yeah, because it's always changing, always developing.
Yeah. Exactly. So when we were talking, you had mentioned we talked about commissions. I do commissions, not so many because most of my audience is in the U.S. and as soon as you look at the cost of cross-border shipping, it torpedoes deals because it's just so expensive.
It's expensive. I've ordered film equipment from there. It's pricey.
It is ridiculous. But you had talked about you had hesitantly accepted the commission because in your mind well, why do they want me to do it? There's better painters out there. But whether it's painting or model making or whatnot, there's always going to be someone better than you out there. So
here's the thing: if I want to make money at it, I will go make money at it. I'm a good enough painter that I could do commission painting. But here's the thing:
you very much could, because your painting is way better than you sell yourself at.
Well, thank you. I pride myself in being humble too, right? I don't want to be because there's always going to be somebody better.
Oh yeah, well yeah. You don't want to be ego driven like some community members we know.
But here's the thing, I paint because I want to. I paint because I love it. I paint because I love having the finished product. I've had businesses before. I've played airsoft. I was a gun tech. Paintball, I was a gun tech for a few specific guns. Film, all very time consuming. Did you know what else is time consuming? Painting miniatures.
I don't paint miniatures, but I have a pretty good idea.
So a 1/28 millimeter scale. Space Marine should take me, on average, if I do everything properly to my level of, quality that I'd like to see myself do, 3 hours. if I'm working on 8 of them or 10 of them at a time, add an extra half an hour because I'm switching back and forth. Like when we do the 3D printing section, I have some tools that I have 3D printed that like just completely and totally make doing that amazing. It's an awesome experience. But that note, it's like, okay, you're not going from painting something because I want to, you're now painting something because you have to. You're painting something because you've made an agreement with somebody for some monetary gain that, if they don't like it, you're going to feel like you failed them somehow, and I did the commission piece because he really wanted them done, and he's just offering me an exorbitant amount of money. He's like, I really want you to paint them. I'm like, I don't want to paint them. And he's like, what if I pay you this? And he still paid me more. And I was like, dude, I can't accept this. And he's like, no, you did a really good job. And I'm like, yeah, okay, but thank you, but I can't accept all of this money for these miniatures. He's like, dude, you put the time in? He's like, that's what it's worth to me. I'm like, okay, thank you. Right. But not every client, and I know this from all of my dealings with client relations, right? Not every client is going to be that good. I know people who...
Most are not.
I know people who teach airbrushing, right, in the Warhammer community. And they're very good at what they do. And they do commission paintings, and they just absolutely hated their life because they're like always working on commission stuff. They don't get to do any of their own stuff. That's the kind of crap you can run into because
you can.
There's a lot of people out there who don't want to get into the painting market because it's expensive, right? Because you have to buy a whole new tool set. You're not just buying the minis. You're buying primers. You're buying brushes. You're buying thinners, you're buying washes, you're buying all kinds of stuff. Plus, you have to store this stuff. So these people might not even have a place to paint, right? I'm lucky enough. I have a big desk and I have a place that I have made a point of dedicating to,
to your work. Yeah.
So, like, not everybody's on the same level, right? So there is a place in the world for commission painters. I choose not to commission paint not because I don't feel like I'm good enough. I like the quality I do, and I like to push myself. And I like it when somebody's like, hey, man, that's really nice. Thank you. You did a good job on that. I love that feeling. But at the same point in time, I don't want to get into having to do it for money. I want to do it because I want to do it. I spent 4 years with Anvil of War having to do stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, because I was still content that the workload you guys created for yourselves was like carrying around an anvil.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It doesn't leave you time, like especially if you're a work-a-day Joe, you got your fucking day job, work all day, then come home, work all night on fucking.
Oh yeah, sometimes I work 12 hours a day. It's insane. Yeah. So like, I have in front of me, I have 8 mechs that have been sitting there for a total of 3 weeks that I will get back to within, like, once it starts getting colder out, once I'm not as busy, I'll finish these guys off because I want to. They're Comstar units. They're all white. And I did them white because actually painting white is a bit of a challenge because it can turn out to be chalky. So I tried a new technique in which I'm learning how to use speed paints. And if you don't know what speed paints are, they're this really new tool in miniature painting to take the problems out of painting, right? So you prime it white, and then you put this color on, and the color literally just seeps into the detail, and you get your shades, you get your contrast levels. Okay. Yeah, you get your contrast levels for that. So what I did with these guys is I primed them white, then I did a zenithal, which is like the zenith of the sun is coming down. So I primed them white, and then I hit them with an airbrush from the bottom with gray to kind of create that shadow, and then I did a very light dusting of a light gray speed paint that's supposed to go on white, and man, did it ever pop! It just looks so good, right? So like now I have a new technique for doing white. So these Comstar units, they're all going to get painted the same way. Most of them are done. I have 4 of them that literally all I have to do is the grass on the terrain. Everything else is painted on them, even the mud on their feet. Right, and they're going to look amazing on the tabletop, and I have a Comstar unit that I can just put down and run the Battle of Tukiyat, which might not mean anything to anybody, but for me, because I'm a huge BattleTech lore fan, it's actually one of the turning points of a major war that happened in the Inner Sphere, right? And that's a whole other level of miniature war painting, right? Like Trekkie nerds, are going to completely understand this. Star Trek has some of the most in-depth lore, right? Yeah, because of the show, and then there's even more on top of that, right? Star Trek's the same way. Star Wars is the same way. Yep. Star Wars has an insane amount of lore. 40K has huge amounts of lore. BattleTech has an insane amount of lore. BattleTech has 300-year time span of history from the invention of the battle mech to infinity. Right, but it spans 300 years, and in that time, the galaxy or the portion of the galaxy that we've inhabited during that time has seen umpteen many wars, right, and conflicts and stuff like that, right, and these battle mechs were used to solve these problems, right, because in the 31st century, life is cheap.
Well, that was a good first part of the conversation. What do you think about where miniature wargaming fits within the sci-fi model making world? Let me know in the comments or reach out to me through DMs on any of the platforms. If you've enjoyed these first few episodes and you would like to support the show, and by extension, Jason's Model Shop as a whole, you can do so by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Sci-Fi Model Podcast. I've set up a number of tiers, and I think hopefully some good rewards. But obviously feel free to check it out and give me your feedback, because maybe there's something I'm missing that would be a better option. If you would like to know more about Ken and what he does, I've attached all the links in the description below. Not just to him, but to Anvil of War as well, because he was such a big part of that. I do hope you enjoyed today's episode, and you'll come back in 2 weeks for the second part of my discussion with Ken, where we get into some other stuff too. I mean, we still talk about wargaming and painting, but we kind of get into the bit more heavy subjects like I like to do, and hopefully will continue to do. And one of those is imposter syndrome. Although we only talk about it a little bit, but still just enough to kind of get into it a little bit, and these things that we face that can sometimes hold us back. If you enjoyed this episode, I hope you'll come back in 2 weeks for the second part of my conversation with Ken. As always, thanks for watching. I really do appreciate it. And remember to feed your plastic addiction and keep on building.